And welcome to the Inspired Overflow radio show. I am your host, Minister Casey Starlong, and I am just so excited that you have joined us for another broadcast of the Inspired Overflow radio show. If this is your first time listening to Inspired Overflow, then I want to welcome you. Inspired Overflow is designed to help you live your best life with Christ, and we try to do that in a multiple variety of ways. So sometimes we have different guests that come on and they share their testimonies of faith, and then we have guests that come on and provide some sound biblical teaching, and then we have folks who are called to the marketplace and they share how God is using them outside of the four walls of the church. And today's show is no different. I have a husband and wife. They're a dynamic duo, and they're just two people that God has put on my heart that I believe that you need to meet. And so from time to time, I ask people to come on the show because I think that they have a word that we need to hear in this season. So without further delay, I want to introduce for the first time on the Inspired Overflow radio show, the pastors of the Freedom Center Church, which is located right here in St. Louis, the husband and wife dynamic duo, Pastor Daniel Rivers and his wife, Pastor Sierra Rivers. Welcome to Inspired Overflow.
Welcome. We're so honored to be a part.
Yes, thank you for having us. We're so excited.
Absolutely. So, Pastor Dan, like I said in the opening, from time to time, I ask different people to come on the show. And God would usually prick my spirit, say, these might be, individual people that I want you to reach out. And as I was explaining before we went on the air, I came to know you and your wife through Facebook, that I would see different people tagging y'all. Mm-hmm. And, I began to say, well, who are these people that, the people that I know, that we know mutually, that I admire? They speak so highly of you and your wife. And so I was like, God, I need to know them. And so God began to show me more. I began to look at your Facebook news feeds and all of that. And I was like, God, this sounds like a really good sound couple. So Pastor Dan, you and your wife, you recently launched a new church called the Freedom Center Church here in St. Louis. Tell us a little bit about the vision for this church.
Definitely. Once again, thank you for having us on. But the place of freedom, definitely. Freedom Center Church was definitely birthed through me and my wife. It was a time where we were kind of playing around with names, and then God said freedom. So when you think about freedom, it's a place where you can come and literally be free, week to week, whatever you are burdened with. Thought came to me as it relates to there was a man in the Bible who had a legion of demons. And when he connected with Jesus, Jesus turned his life around and he became free. So just a place where people can come and the atmosphere will be conducive for you to be free in worship and where you can leave free.
Yeah. Pastor Sierra, very rarely does God give us a name for a book or a name of a church without that being part of our personal experience. Mm-hmm. So you and your husband, you lead a church called Freedom Center Church. Your scripture is he whom the Son has set free is free indeed. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about you and maybe your husband's testimony of God giving you that freedom so now you can help others get free through Jesus Christ.
Well, I would definitely say that our personal testimony is that we have always been hungry for a free atmosphere, not limiting God to 10 minutes of this, 30 minutes of that, and so we really try to implement, not just in our services, but in our life, not to shackle people down, not to even have like a shackled mindset. But even in our personal testimony, back in 2013, right? 2014, somewhere around
Know your
there.
point?
Where are you leading?
Yeah, I was pregnant. Well, let me say with my last child,
Okay,
and
yeah,
she'll be 2.
2013. Okay.
Okay. So we were in a situation where we were kind of bound by the circumstance and could not really move around freely, couldn't do a lot of things. I was on bed rest for like 4 months. And just miraculously through that time of God building our faith, he set us free. And I think that the freedom was not instantaneous breakthrough. The freedom was freedom in our mind. Yeah. You know, being in a position where we didn't have a choice but to be in that position, but we had a choice of how we were going to cope in that position. So that's the freedom that we experienced. It was a commitment, you know, and it was hard, but you know, God gave us peace. And so we were able to really embody the spirit of freedom with being in a situation, which kind of sounds like a parallel or, you know,
paradox.
Yeah, paradox. But, you know, it worked for us.
And, you know, that's the power of the Lord. That our situations don't change. But when God gives us freedom in our minds, then we have a whole new perspective, right?
Yes.
Because that's what the word will do.
Yes.
So I want to talk about, because you all recently launched the church, Freedom Center Church, right here in St. Louis in 2016, correct?
2015. End of 2015.
Okay, so the
November.
Okay, so at the very end of November. So you all are just very new walking this thing out as pastors. I want to talk to you, Pastor Dan. Tell us about the call that God began to put on your heart to start the church. What did that sound like? What did that look like? You know, what was that like for you?
Well, definitely. Well, first and foremost, I got saved at the tender age of 20. And I never wanted to be a pastor. Never wanted to be a pastor. So like Jonah, for years I ran from God. So once I got saved, God began to speak to me as far as who you are and what you're called to do. So just as it relates to starting Freedom Center Church, I was in prayer. Maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I was in prayer, and God spoke to me. And He said 2015.
Wow.
And I went up and I told my wife, I said, "Hey, babe, I believe God is telling us 2015 to start a church in 2015." And she said, "Yes, He told me the same thing."
Wow.
In a different time,
Yeah.
in her prayer time. But he spoke to us years ago, and we knew it would be in 2015. So more so being in a place. I talked about Sunday, that it's good to have vision, but we need to always make sure that we're getting our vision from the visionary.
That's good.
And the visionary is the person who created the universe. So God began to speak to me concerning Freedom Center Church years ago because I was in a place where I was listening to Him, where I was in a place where I was like Samuel saying, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." So just being in a posture, in a place of prayer and hearing His voice.
You know, there are people who are listening to you all about, answering the call to pastor a church. They don't realize how young you guys are. And now, Pastor Dan, I know you just celebrated a birthday yesterday, but Inspired Overflow listeners, if you're just joining in, we're joined in the studio with Pastor Daniel Rivers and his wife, Pastor Sierra Rivers. They're the pastors of the new church here in St. Louis called Freedom Center Church. And they're in their 30s. And so, Pastor Sierra, I want to talk about what is it like to pastor a church with your husband and also to raise 4 children?
Wow. That's a super duper question. I would say that it's exciting, but it also is a lot of work. And the truth of the matter is, and we'll get into if we talk about increase and keys to steps to that, but just really, really having the balance and the focus that it takes to really just, assess and count up the cost of each sphere. You know what I'm saying? Because you have the church, you have your family, and your family is first. And so I would say the number one thing is just balancing and know, the kids come first. So sometimes I have to adjust, or I can't answer the phone at that time, or, but I would definitely say, as it relates to pastoring, when you have a burden to do it, is something that you cannot rest until it is done. So even though I have the responsibility of being a mother, a wife, I still have the burden of being a pastor. I still have a burden for seeing lives change and transform. So it's just like I can't rest even when, I'm tired. I get that rest, but I'm also ministry is always on my mind.
Yeah, and I thank God for the burden. And my husband and I, we just came off the road, and I was like, I got the show. I've been driving all day, but I was telling my husband, but His grace is sufficient.
Yes.
And like Pastor Sierra, you talked about the burden that God is giving you to be a pastor. So He's also graced you to be a wife.
Definitely.
He's graced you also to be a pastor, and His grace is sufficient.
Yes.
And I think that when we understand that as leaders, because we all are balancing multiple hats, but if we just remember, I feel tired, but His grace is sufficient. I can do it.
Definitely.
I can do it. I can do it. Well, Inspired Overflow listeners, we're joined in the studio with Pastors Daniel Rivers and his wife, Pastor Sierra Rivers. They are the pastors of a new church here in St. Louis called the Freedom Center Church. You can also check them out at freedomcenterchurchstl.com. They have their services every Sunday at 11 a.m. at the Olivet Community Center. Now, Pastor Dan, I've been coming across a lot of new church plants. And me and my husband, we've been seeing churches. They're in strip malls. They're in hotels. You guys are in a community center. Just talk about what is that like to kind of have like a non-traditional church.
Well, it's quite challenging. It's quite challenging. Unfortunately, we weren't left a church, So you kind of got to start. And we're planning a church, so we're starting from scratch. So you got to kind of go where the space is available. So it's great, but it also has great challenging being a place because you're not going to be there for a long period of time. So it's great, but that comes along with planting a church. Nothing. Rome wasn't built in a day.
Right.
So you really have to walk by faith, and